number 2, and starting 2 Samuel. We're going to cover the whole chapter 2, and I'm determined if I can, and this one was a long one, but try to cover a chapter each week, and it'll just kind of depend on how it goes. This one, I entitled this whole thing, King David, a Bloody Beginning, because it really is. Saul is now dead, along with, of course, his 2 oldest sons. They all died in the same battle with the Philistines. We don't know much about how, and I should say his 3 oldest sons. We don't know a lot about how Jonathan or Abinadab or Malchishua died in battle. But we do know a great deal, if you remember, how Saul died. And we even know the repercussions of his death, that someone claimed, that Amalekite man, who as he claimed to slay Saul, David said, how could you raise your hand up against God's anointed? Have no shame in doing that, and had him slain. David really honored Saul in every way that he could possibly do so. He never disparaged Saul. You'll never see that. He never talks about his sins. We read about them, but David doesn't make that a prominent place in his reign. This chapter begins with David ready to begin his rule. But as you'll soon find out, there is a conflict, and it is a bloody one. More lopsided, as you'll see, but that's definitely there. We also see 2 commanding officers, 2 generals, if you will. One by the name of Joab, and one by the name of Abner. And those are 2 names that you probably are already familiar with, but I want you to remember those names because they're going to mean something, and you're going to read more about them. And this really seems to start a bloody feud between the 2 of them in this particular chapter that you'll take note of. Even though it's a blessed beginning, and it begins with prayer, as you'll soon see, it still is a bloody beginning. David knows that his rule is now officially beginning because Saul has passed from the scene. Remember, David has been anointed for some 38 years. And yet he has waited up until this time to where now finally he will begin his rule. He has waited patiently. He sat and waited, though, in strength. Sometimes people think waiting patiently is a sign of weakness. Not with David. It was a sign of strength. So we'll begin with this, but I want to give you an overall look at, I'm going to break it down differently, but you can break this chapter down into 4 primary parts. David's kingdom, verses 1 through 7. The rival kingdom, verses 8 through 11. Abner and Joab, and really I could say this goes to the end of the chapter from verse 12 to verse 32, but we'll just say from verse 12 to 17, and then we'll talk about the pursuit, and by that I mean there's a pursuit of Abner, Abner, and then the costly peace, what it takes, what happened when we see the results of all that had happened. So let's get started with this one. We've got a lot of verses to follow, but verse 1, it came to pass after this, after we'd talked about Saul being killed and some of the other things that took place, that David inquired of the Lord. Isn't that wonderful? The first thing that he does, he inquires of the Lord. And take note of what he says and what must have been involved. I'm assuming that David has already tried to use the Urim and the Thummim. He's used the priest. And so it's likely, though we don't read it, but it's very likely that that's what he did here. So he's kind of looking for yes and no answers. We don't get multiple choices. in this situation. But here's the thing, that he already has to have some questions devised. He has to already have some logic, some reasoning that's in his mind, because he then asks, shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said unto him, go up. And David said, whither shall I go up? And he said, unto Hebron. Now, whether that was a direct revelation, or again, whether he said which one of these cities, was it this one? No, this was the long drawn out part of the request that was there. But his questions, though they are also well thought out, he was not seeking his will, but God's will. Should we start with the cities in my own tribe? And, of course, this is a really major move that he brings before the Lord. David believed that God had anointed him king. Well, he knew God had anointed him king in Saul's place. And if you remember, quite interestingly, David never took the crown from Saul's head. That crown was delivered to David. It was not taken by David. It was not taken by any of his men. It was taken by an enemy of Israel's, but it was handed to him. David believed, and I think you can get a sense of, for instance, it made me think of this psalm. The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delighteth in his way. Think about that for just a minute. These are, when you look at the Psalms, these are principles, these are practices of David. And I believe that's exactly what he put into practice here. He showed a dependence upon God rather than, like Saul did, he showed an independence from God. He looked for and he found direction. Remember, Saul at the end of his ministry looked for but found no direction from God. And so now, okay, you found direction. What must you do? Now it's time to go. So in verses 2 and 3, so David went up thither, and his two wives also, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and Abigail, Nabal's wife, the Carmelite, and his men that were with him did David bring up, every man with his household, and they dwelt in the cities of Hebron. Now you have to think a little bit. Flocks, herds, families, and belongings. All of those that belonged to over 600 of his men, now they're looking for grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins that can be spread throughout their country that's here. And of course, they didn't all just land in Hebron. They landed on all these different cities. They're finding their roots all over again after having been run around in the land of the Philistines and in Israel. Then we see in verse 4 David's official anointing. And the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, saying, the men of Jabesh Gilead were they that buried Saul. A lot of people will try to give reasoning, motivations, for why these men did such. I'm just going to take it at face value as what they did. And once it is known that David has returned to Hebron, these men anointed him, and they told him about the Jabesh Gilead, and how I believe they told him about the heroics of these men, because that's what it took. It took a lot of heroic actions of these men to capture, if you remember, those desecrated bodies of Saul and his sons and bring them back, bearing the bones of Saul and his sons, and they did so with dignity. So it was something that David, I think, they knew he would want to honor them. So that's what we read, David's official first act as king, not only to pray, of course, but in verses 5, 6, and 7, we'll see it, his first official act. And David sent messengers unto the men of Jabesh Gilead, and said unto them, Blessed be ye of the Lord, that ye have showed this kindness unto your Lord, even unto Saul, and have buried him. And now the Lord show kindness and truth unto you, and I also. Now you would think, again, during this particular time, people were wiping out any kind of enemy to their or threat to their throne, or any kind of, even another group of people that were sympathetic, for instance, to Saul. You would think they would be in danger, and David's letting them know, nope, I will requite you or repay this kindness because you have done this thing. Therefore now let your hands be strengthened and be ye valiant, for your master Saul is dead, and also the house of Judah hath anointed me king over them. He didn't claim to be their king. Interesting, isn't it? He didn't claim and say, I'm your king. He knew that being a king at this time was something that he would have to earn. David is letting these men know that he was chosen, and he was acknowledging their honor and their heroics for what they had done, and that he holds no grudge. He seeks no revenge. He sees nothing disloyal in their actions when they sought to honor their former king, and he will now be their protector. So they were informed of their actions, and there's something else now, because now all of a sudden this is happening. There's something else going on. There's a conflicting appointment on the other side of the river, if you remember. And Abner, the son of Ner, captain of Saul's host. Now, most people will say that Abner was Saul's cousin. Some will say it was his uncle. I'm not going to argue one way or the other who exactly it was. Sometimes I even get confused when it talks about so-and-so, the son of, and goes down through there. But Abner was basically the general of Saul's army. And so what does he do? Excuse me. He takes Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. Now, if you remember, this guy was not mentioned at war. Jonathan was there, and you had the other two elder brothers that were also there, but this was probably, again, the fourth guy down the line. He wasn't out. People will say, well, he was taking care of the homeland, and you don't know what he was doing, whether he was frightened to go out, whether he was a weak-charactered particular individual. I don't know. But if you'll notice the very first word of that verse, but Abner. Contrast, in other words. The men of Judah took and anointed David, but Abner set up Ishbosheth to be the king over Israel. Let's go a little bit further, because Abner, if you think about this too, Abner was in control of the army when Saul was killed. Abner was one of those men that was in control of the army when they lost and fled before the Philistines. How is it that Abner has remained alive during this time? Well, I can tell you this. I think it's one of the reasons. You'll find out a little bit later. He's very fleet of foot. He's quite a runner. He was trying to, I think, though, in this, he's trying to secure his own authority as captain of Saul's host. Some, again, when we look at this, have given him different reasons, but I think he also took and put this man, Ishbosheth, as the king on the other side, when it tells you that Mahanaim was on the other side of the Jordan River. So that's not on the regular side. That was where the tribe of Gad, Manasseh, and Noah were on the other side of the Jordan River. And verse 9, and he made him king over Gilead and over the Ashurites and over Jezreel and over Ephraim and over Benjamin and over all Israel. Now, just to think about this, this is really in opposition to God's known will. Most everybody has already known, even Saul knew, that God had chosen David. And he was told that he had been rejected, and another man had been put in his place. So Abner is really defying God's direct will and making a claim for the throne of Israel for Ishbosheth. Abner secured agreements, I think, with some of these other tribes, and then we learned that Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel and reigned 2 years. Now, somebody say, well, he only reigned 2 years. Well, I think he reigned 2 years before all of this started happening. You'll get a little bit further that David reigned for about 7.5 years until he began to reign over all of Israel. But this 2 years is before this little problem comes up and starts happening. Interesting also that in 1 Chronicles chapter 8, verse 33, and chapter 9 and verse 39, give him the name of Eshbaal. That's a combination. The first word, Esh, has to do with shame, and the last word is Baal. That's the false god. Eshbaal. Now, why is that? I do not know. But then we'll read about David's limited reign in verses 11 through 15, where it says, and at that time David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah for 7 years and 6 months. That means that he had a limited rule, a limited reign for that particular time. So even though David was now given free reign, if you will, to go ahead and claim the throne that God had given to him and anointed him for, yet he still has to wait for another 7.5 years for his reign to come into its maturity, for his reign to come into its fullness. And then what do we read too? And Abner, the son of Ner, and the servants of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon. And Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and the servants of David went out and met together by the pool of Gibeon. And they sat down, the one on the one side of the pool, and the other on the other side of the pool. Now, this is going to be kind of interesting because you're going to see a little bit of a political power play. And I believe that it is a power play by Abner to think that he can gain control over the other tribe or over David and get rid of the threat to his rule that's there. So they crossed over Jordan, got into this particular place where they prepared for battle. But then we see what happened was that they got prepared. So instead of actually just getting into the fight, notice there had to have been some sort of order. I don't think that Ishbosheth gave any orders. I think he was being directed and told what to do by Abner. But Joab, I think, was instructed, you don't fight, you don't kill, you don't do anything until you're attacked or unless you're attacked. The reason why I say that is because what happens next. Verse 14. Well, we'll read both 14 and 15. And Abner said to Joab, let the young men now arise and play before us. And Joab said, let them arise. Then there arose and went over by number 12 of Benjamin, which pertained to Ishbosheth, the sons of Saul, and 12 of the servants of David. Now, might be a little bit, at first you're thinking, well, wait a minute, this doesn't sound too bad. When it says play, they're not talking about playing swords. They're not talking about playing cowboys and Indians like we used to do when we were kids. They're talking about putting 12 men up against one another, and those 12 men are going to fight for the future of who's going to be in control. So if you think about that, you've got 12 men, 12 from one side, 12 from the other side, and they are going to battle it out and see who wins. So you would think you send your 12 best, and that's what it looks like happen. But it is not play. And you can see it and this is why I said from here down, from verses 16 to 17, where it becomes a bloody rule. Now, those 12, what happens? And they caught everyone his fellow by the head. Now, and thrust his sword in his fellow's side. It sounds like they're doing the same kind of move on either side. And so that happens, and they fell down together. In other words, all 24 of them died right there. That's it. And you can pronounce that nice long name that's up there. Not going to try it even. I tried it several times to get my tongue twisted because there were so many different names and words in this one. Well, Helkath, hazzurim, whatever it is, which is in Gibeon. It just means the sharp rocks. It means the place, it's a place where they were remembering this is what happened right here. So it became famous for this brutal sword play that took place, and they gave it a name in accordance. It was a brutal battle. And really, Abner's men were the aggressors. Joab's men matched them in ferocity. But again, all 24 of them are dead. And verse 17, and there was a very sore battle that day. Because after that, of course, there was no winner. So what did they do? They had to start fighting. And as they started fighting, Abner was beaten, and the men of Israel before the servants of David. So Abner's army was made to flee, just like they did before the Philistines. Abner needs to learn something here, but never seems to do that. But he's not a rookie. He's not a beginner in battle. And this is where I talked about a persistent pursuit from verse 18 to verse 25. Verse 18, and there were the three sons of Zeruiah. There were Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. Now, we already know Joab. He was primarily the general under David and the man that was there helping with David, and he becomes the leader of David's men. But he's got two other brothers. And what does he say? And Asahel was light of foot as a wild roe. That means that guy can run. That means that guy is fleet-footed. And wherever he goes, he can do. And so what happens? Asahel pursued after Abner. And in going, he turned not to the right hand nor to the left from following after Abner. If I'm not mistaken, too, Asahel was one of David's sons-in-law, and he, being fast and fleet-footed, took on that task of pursuing Abner. But again, Abner's no rookie. He's a skilled warrior. He's not afraid. But as he is running, and if this guy was fleet-footed, remember that Abner's able to keep in front of him. And it's after they begin to catch up that here's what we got afterwards. Then Abner looked behind him and said, Art thou Asahel? And he said, I am. And Abner said to him, Turn thee aside to thy right hand or to thy left, and lay thee hold on one of the young men, and take thee his armor. In other words, go over there and get your reward. Don't come after me anymore. Don't, in fact, he says, you want to even say that you caught me, but here's the armor? Do that. But Asahel would not turn aside from following him. And Abner said unto Asahel, Turn thee aside from following me. Wherefore should I smite thee to the ground? How then should I hold up my face to Joab thy brother? They know who they're fighting. I mean, this is a civil war, is what it is. A war between brothers. Abner, I think, has great respect for his adversary on the other side, Joab, and he knows that this is his brother. And then verse 23, howbeit he refused to turn aside. Wherefore Abner, and you can just kind of get a picture as he's running ahead. that he's also got his spear tucked under his arm and ready to go, and he's luring him up and letting him catch up. And so wherefore Abner, with the hinder end of the spear, smote him. It's like as he came up, he just went behind him, under the fifth rib, that the spear came out behind him. And he fell down there and died in the same place. Abner kept running. And it came to pass that as many came to the place where Asahel fell down and died, stood still. Stubborn, persistent, honorable, but dead, nonetheless. And as he died, wherever he died there, the army of David was affected. They knew this man, and they could not go any further. They stopped right where he fell to the ground and would not pursue any further. But somebody else did. That's where we read, while others stood still, Joab and Abishai stopped only long enough to honor their brother, but continued to pursue after Abner. Verse 24, Joab also and Abishai pursued after Abner, and the sun went down when they were come to the hill of Ammah, that lieth before Gilead by the way of the wilderness of Gibeon. Their pursuit was persistent until they came to this particular hill. Now, I'm going to assume, too, you can get the idea that the hill probably had a peak, a little valley or something there, where the two sides could kind of match up with one another, because what happened was, as they came out on the other side, or on that side, that the children of Benjamin gathered themselves, verse 25, together after Abner. In other words, they gathered together to support Abner. And they became one troop and stood on the top of a hill. Now you have on the other side only two men that had been pursuing on. Remember, the rest of them are stopped. The rest of them are honoring their fallen lieutenant, or whatever he might have been in their army, but a respected man. And so only Joab and Abishai are there. And so then we read in verse 26, this is where I call it the pursuit of peace. Then Abner called to Joab and said, shall the sword devour forever? Knowest thou not that it will be bitterness in the latter end? How long shall it be then ere thou bid the people return from following their brethren? How long are you going to do this, Joab? Are you going to wait until we're all wiped out? I have to say that Abner seems well acquainted with defeat and how to survive in times of defeat, and he calls for a truce. Joab is a very different man from Abner, from what I can gain, and lays the blame squarely upon Abner for this whole matter. Joab reminds him that none of this was his idea. He came out peaceably after Abner started this mess. And he says in verse 27, 28, Joab said, as God liveth, unless thou hadst spoken, surely then in the morning the people had gone up every one from following his brother. If you hadn't started this, we'd have stopped. So Joab, though, what does he do to stop all this? He blows a trumpet, and all the people stood still and pursued after Israel no more, neither fought they any more. Clear signal was given. Seems like David and the troops of Judah were very well organized. And it seems more so when you see the results of this battle. They ceased their aggression. David's orders and Joab's designs were not to eliminate their fellow countrymen unless, or I should say, until the aggressors stopped. And when they did stop, they stopped as well. Then we read in the final few verses a very lopsided accounting. And Abner and his men walked all night through the plain and passed over Jordan. Where are they going? They're going back to the other side where the 2.5 tribes are over there. And they came back and they camped. That's it. They went back across the Jordan. And of course, that's where they put Ishbosheth on the throne. Joab returns also and begins an accounting of the casualties. And verse 30 and 31, 32, and Joab returned from following Abner. And when he had gathered all the people together, there lacked of David's servants 19 men and Asahel. So 20 men out of David's forces were killed. But of the servants of David had smitten of Benjamin and of Abner's men, so that 360 men, 360 men of Abner's men died. That's quite a lopsided battle, wouldn't you say? 20 to 360, that's quite a bit of difference that's there. And what happens? And they took up Asahel and buried him in the sepulchre of his father, which was in Bethlehem. And Joab and his men went all night, and they came to Hebron at the break of day. After they took up the body of Asahel, they buried him with honor. And again, it's kind of interesting, isn't it, that it talked about both their armies went all night long after they had fought. Neither one of them stopped. Even Abner and all of the men of Benjamin, Joab and all of his men, again, all back to Hebron, but they stopped to count, and they stopped to be able to honor Asahel and pick up his body and bring him back. But what a bloody beginning. Not a very smooth beginning. You would think, I got to find my microphone here, so don't want to cough in it when I'm clearing my throat, that David and everyone else, knowing that Saul had sought for his life for so long, and everyone knew that David had been anointed by God and appointed by Samuel to be the king after Saul, that it all gone well. But it didn't. And you're going to find out David's character a lot more than just through his dealings here on this particular occasion. You're going to find it a little bit later with his dealing with Abner, and you're going to find it with his dealings with Mephibosheth, which is again one of Saul's sons or grandsons that are there, when he asked, are there any of the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? He remembers that covenant that they made. Pray that's been a blessing to you tonight. We got through that rather easily. It was just really a rather simple story, but there's a lot of information that's in there and a lot of things that you can pick up on, again, with the characteristics of David. First thing that he does right out of the bat, before he even makes a move, here he is. He knows that the way is being made open for him to become king, but what does he do? God, how do I do this? Where should I go first? How should I do this? Should I go to the cities of Judah? Should I go up to Hebron? And of course, God tells him to go and where to go and what to do. But it is a blessing to be able to read this. I am thoroughly thrilled with being able to get into it a little bit more, spending more time in it, becoming more familiar. Again, you know, sometimes we read these stories early on in our Christian life, and then we never read them through as a whole again. So I'm really appreciating getting to read all of the stories in the background and kind of fill in a little bit more of the details. Remember the names of Joab, Abner, and of course, Saul and Ishbosheth. Got it right that time. Anyway.